Steam frame news dropped from like 5 different directions this week. Now that we've got official Steam machine pricing, we can sort of use that to estimate Steam frame's price. We also have a fresh batch of FCC style documents containing photos of the frame out of Japan, a new build of the wireless adapter driver, information about how PC games are going to run on the ARM translation layer, and a new leak that might actually confirm why PCVR on the Steam frame is a thing. So let's get into all of that. Now, starting with the price. The Steam machine's price was announced on Monday, and all of you already know that, so I'm not gonna sit here and list every other config. It's painful enough as it is. Okay, let's not get into the Steam machine's price at all. Now, Valve's own blog post on this said that RAM and storage costs changed quickly and significantly from what they modeled back for the price in 2023, which is when they actually started sourcing parts for the new devices. Now, I'm bringing this up in a Steam frame video because the Steam machine was originally supposedly targeting $750. We know it landed at $1,049, and that's a $300 jump, so almost 40% over the original number. And if some rumors since November are true, we kinda always knew that the cost of the Steam frame will be more than the cost of the Steam machine. So the analysts have bumped their estimate up for the Steam frame as well. It's now between $899 to $1,199 for the 256GB model. The Steam frame still hasn't gotten an official price, but multiple outlets expect it to follow the exact same playbook. So tech reviews dropped, price announced, reservation system announced, all of it the same as we have with the Steam machine. And last night we may have actually gotten confirmation of that. Well, confirmation that something is happening in the same pattern, not that it is close. Steam machine's own SteamOS 3.8 support went through a preview phase, then a beta test phase, and only then went fully stable right as the hardware launched. And it started all the way back in March. Now, last night we got some Steam frame related code showing up in the main branch of SteamOS 3.9. That main branch is the earliest, most experimental branch Valve has, before anything even reaches preview, beta, or is even available to straight up download on the Steam machine or the Steam Deck. You can still download it, it's just not official at all. So if the machine needed a preview, then a beta phase, and then a stable release before it could ship, the Steam frame's code hasn't even reached preview or beta yet, and that gap could be bigger than days, it could be weeks, it could be months. Honestly, I don't know. I hope it's sometime in July. I just know it's probably not gonna drop this Monday. I hope I'm wrong. Now, about 32,000 kilograms of Steam frame hardware already cleared US warehouses earlier this month, so the hardware is clearly ready. But the software might actually be in a rocky state right now. We're gonna talk about that later. But Valve themselves said the next thing is the Steam frame, and we'll get to that after the Steam machine is out the door. The Steam machine is barely on its way to the door, let alone out the door. We only just got reservation emails, and Valve are going to start asking for the dough starting on Monday. So we're quite a long way away before we can say that they're done with the whole Steam machine release window and moving on to Steam frame. Now back to that Steam frame price. I wanted to actually run the math myself instead of just repeating all these analyst numbers I see on various different websites. Now, Valve hinted that Steam machine was gonna be $750 before all of the AI, RAM, and storage apocalypse. And a lot of us assumed frame would land somewhere around $800 to $899, since it was always gonna cost more than the machine. If you apply that same $299 increase, an $800 starting point now becomes $1,099, and an $899 starting point now becomes $1,198. If you do it as a percentage instead, since $299 on $750 works out to roughly 40%, that $800 number becomes $1,119. And if the pattern holds the way it did with the Steam machine, I wouldn't be shocked if the Steam frame lands closer to $1,200 than to $900. Now, Valve did tell us back around November that they were aiming to land under the $999 price point, which was the original price for the full Index VR kit. So even the low end of my math already blows past that promise, and I would actually understand if they can't meet that. 16GB of RAM on the Steam frame is part of the problem here, the same way as it is for the Steam Machine. Same memory pricing crunch that pushed Steam Machine pricing up is sitting right under the frame's hood as well. It is a different kind of RAM, it's unified memory, it works with an out chip, but it's still made by the same chunk of memory that the big boys are now buying in bulk, and Valve has admitted that there is an issue with sourcing the actual RAM. You can't really negotiate the price of it, you either buy what they have or you're left not buying at all, not even buying, you're left with no connections in the RAM industry at all. So where does that leave us then? For comparison, the Quest 3 is $649 for the 512GB model after its own price increase, so even at the low end the Steam Frame is going to cost a lot more than Meta's headset. And I think the Steam Frame isn't really trying to win a spec for spec fight with the Quest or even a fight on the price, just like the Steam Machine isn't really trying to compete with the PS5 and Xbox both in terms of power and in terms of price. I think the Steam Frame is positioning itself as the streaming first option, and the promise of an ARM PC gaming is enticing as well, but the price gap is still pretty big. And if we're hoping this will make a dent in the VR space and make VR more affordable, I think we're all due for a big disappointment. And the 1TB model will almost certainly add another few hundred on top of whatever the base price ends up being, because storage is in the same boat as RAM right now pricing wise. Not to mention that alleged enthusiast kit, there will for sure be a version of the Steam Frame that will cost upwards of $1,500. So what do you think? Are you still hopeful for an under $1,000 as a base price? Let me know in the comments below. Now we have some new images of the Steam Frame and they're coming out of Japan's MIC Giteki certification. It's kind of like the Japanese equivalent of the US FCC, and they show things like the exact microphone placement, which actually is kind of hard to spot in a couple of the photos, but it does seem to be sitting lower on the underside of the device than we initially expected. And in these photos there's also some new angles around the battery module on the back of the head strap, so that's the same area that's relevant to that alleged hot swap battery enthusiast kit, that story I covered in my last Steam Frame video, and that battery is looking very thin. I was actually surprised at how thin it looks, and I'm not sure if Valve did that to make it overall lighter and more comfortable, but it looks like they could have crammed twice the battery amount back there if they made it a bit bigger. Now, I guess we'll see, and now I'm really curious about that enthusiast kit and what its battery is going to look like. Now, the actual FCC filing in the US is still sitting under short-term confidentiality, so whatever comes out of there later probably won't add a lot we don't already know, but you never know. I'm gonna be keeping an eye on that and I'm gonna let you know if we discover something new. And for whatever reason, the equivalent Canadian filing doesn't have any of this documentation up yet, so it may not yet be certified in Canada. I think this missing from US and Canada regulation tells us that the Steam Frame might not actually land until after next month. Again, I was hoping for this Monday, but at this point that seems unlikely. If you guys are enjoying this breakdown and you're into Steam, Steam hardware, Steam Deck and gaming handhelds and tech, consider subscribing to the channel. Now on the actual hardware side, the wireless adapter driver listing on Steam got updated again this week. It's app 3990420 if you want to track it yourself. Right now it's just listed as a 2 app under Windows on Valve side. Now why am I mentioning this? If you're planning on using this on a stock Windows PC, none of this really matters to you. That official package update is what's handling that. However, for Linux, and this is the part that's actually interesting, the chip inside that wireless dongle only just got proper Linux support added basically within the last few months. So you're going to need a fairly recent version of your Linux distro. So anything from later in this year, so after March, is probably gonna be fine. But that means that the Steam Frame is not going to straight up work with everything in Linux. If you're on an older setup, you're stuck manually installing extra drivers yourself, which is nobody's favorite weekend. None of this is really a deal breaker. It's just the kind of thing that will trip people up on launch day if Valve doesn't polish that. Now, PCVR on Linux is not as straightforward as it is on Windows. Valve has said that the Steam Machine will work with the Steam Frame, but there might be issues for it working with other VR devices, and there might be issues with the Steam Frame working with other devices. Now, my takeaway from this is that Valve's integration between the Steam Machine and the Steam Frame might not be as polished as it needs to be before the launch, and this might be one of the things that is holding back the Steam Frame from releasing. Now, 2 stories from Brad Lynch. my go-to data mining wizard, he has spotted a dedicated performance settings menu showing up in some SteamOS strings sitting in the quick access menu. So that's the same place you would find it on the Steam Deck. So the Steam Frame will also have that side menu with some different options. One option in there is for eye-tracked foveated rendering. This is the type of rendering that improves fidelity of the picture where your eyes are looking at. This is something that's integrated on the game level. It's not the same as foveated streaming. But the more interesting one is a toggle related to running PC games translated onto the Steam Frame's ARM chip. There's options for auto, force on, force off, for TSO and other different settings. Now you guys may know I've tested more than 100, maybe even 200 PC games running on my Android handheld, the Odin 3, which uses the same ARM translation layer that the Steam Frame will use to run PC games natively. Now there's several different apps on Android that can run PC games, but they all use the same translation layer and the settings that come with it. And a lot of the times you have to tweak quite a few settings before you get a good experience out of the games you're trying to play. The strings found here seem to show an advanced mode for adjusting those settings. For example, a performance or compatibility mode, and then settings selected by Valve or settings overridden by the user. So most likely Valve will be auto-applying some of these ARM translation layer settings on the games. And then if you like tweaking stuff, you'll be able to override some of those in order to get a better experience out of specific games or even get them to run. I actually love this. One of the main reasons I love the Steam Deck is the possibility to tweak stuff and to try and get specific performance out of a game. And this code suggests that we're gonna be able to do the same thing on the Steam Frame, which is pretty exciting. Now on to the last topic, wired PCVR. Now Brad Lynch, again, this dude probably doesn't sleep. He first spotted a graphic code Steam Frame wired cable sitting alongside new artwork for the wireless dongle, and going through the actual interface strings backs that up. There is a connection type called wired USB sitting right next to wireless adapter, wired connection to your router, Wi-Fi connection, and then even remote connection. So it seems like there's 5 separate ways this thing can actually link up. There's also a status called multi-link active or inactive, which might mean it's possible to use more than one Steam Frame at the same time, or maybe link the Steam Frame to more than one devices at the same time. That part's kind of a speculation, and I can't really think of a use case for this. If you can think of a use case for this, let me know in the comments below, because this sounds interesting. Now, I'll be honest, I brought wired PCVR up as a possibility in a video months ago, and I got dragged for it pretty hard because the USB on the frame is marked as USB 2.0. So people figured there's no way you would get the necessary speeds for lag-free, good bandwidth PCVR connection, and that was basically the whole argument against it. However, these strings we're seeing right now are kind of arguing the other side of that. Maybe it will be something available with the Enthusiast kit. Now, if that Enthusiast kit is a whole new head strap with a different battery at the end, maybe that battery will have a USB 3 connection, or maybe this is an entirely separate module available for purchase. I don't know. The most realistic use case here is probably something like a VR cafe setup, or anyone who just wants to skip battery anxiety on a long session, doesn't mind being tethered. So not really wired PCVR, more like wired just for battery purposes. I don't know. The whole selling point of the Steam Frame is that it's going to be great for streaming PCVR and for standalone games, be it 2D PC games or VR games. So I'm really interested to see what this wired PCVR ends up being. And that's about it. Nothing confirmed on pricing or timing for any of this, but that's basically everything that moved on Steam Frame this week. If you guys enjoyed this video, consider leaving a like. If you hated it, leave a dislike and let me know what I can do to improve. And if you're into Steam, Steam Deck, Steam hardware and gaming handhelds, consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.